There are three words that enable us to rejoice in the midst of any trials or troubles or temptations. There are three words that enable us to overlook the economy, overlook what's happening around the world, overlook even the ridiculously difficult problems that we have had with COVID-19. And those three words are, Jesus is alive. You believe those three words, you can overcome anything else. You don't believe those three words, that truth, why anything can sink you. The economy can sink you, discouragement can sink you, COVID can sink you. Just about anything can sink you because Satan can use them to sink you. But if you believe these three words, Jesus is alive, you can overcome in this life and the next anything. Now, Clint read for us a few verses in John chapter 20 about what happened on the night of Jesus' resurrection, the Sunday night of Jesus' resurrection. And so he read for us verses 19 through 23, and I'm going to pick up in the same text and begin reading in verse 24. One of the 12 disciples, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, was not with the others when Jesus came. They told Thomas, "We have seen the Lord." But he replied, "I won't believe it unless I see the nail wounds in his hands, put my fingers into them, and place my hand into the wound in his side." 8 days later, the disciples were together again. And this time, Thomas was with them. The doors were locked, but suddenly, as before, Jesus was standing among them. "Peace be with you," he said. Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and look at my hands. Put your hand into the wound in my side. Don't be faithless any longer. Believe." And Thomas exclaimed, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "You believe because you have seen me. Blessed are those who believe without seeing me." A lot of people have nicknames. Have you ever had a nickname? A lot of people have nicknames. I had two. One was given to me when I was in high school and is still used by my good friends, including one who is here today. They still refer to me by this nickname. I'm not going to tell you what it is because it's somewhat offensive and has to do with weight. But a lot of people have nicknames. They do. For instance, sports is well known for nicknames, right? I'm just going to quickly throw out about 5 or 6 nicknames, and you tell me if you know who I'm talking about. Let's go to the world of basketball. Dr. J. Julius Erving, that's good. Air Jordan, Michael Jordan, that's good. Let's go to baseball. The Sultan of SWAT, Babe Ruth, that's good. And let's go to baseball again. Let's go Hammerin' Hank or the Hammer. Hank Aaron. And I said that because my Atlanta Braves are going to the World Series. I put this whole segment in just so I could say, I'm going to the World Series. And for you Dodgers fans, I don't care. But anyway, let's go to the world of football for just a minute. How about this one? Let's go locally. Prime time. Deion Sanders. Let's do this one. Let's go back a few years and let's do this one. Broadway Joe. Broadway Joe Namath, who bless his heart has gone from the 70s, putting on pantyhose on TV and selling us pantyhose to now trying to sell me Social Security benefits. That's just sad. That is. Well, Thomas, according to our text, had a nickname too. His nickname was Twin. We just read it in our text in verse 24. Twin. But that's not the nickname most of us have known him by, or people for the last 2,000 years. They have known him as Doubting Thomas. That's how you always hear him referred to, as Doubting Thomas. I've always thought that was a little bit unfair. I really have. In fact, for many years I have refused to call him Doubting Thomas. I mean, how would you like to be known with a nickname in front of your name for the worst moment of your life? For the worst thing you ever said, or for the worst choice you ever made? How about if they just stuck that in front of your name and that's how you were known for the rest of your life? When in fact, I think it's not only fair for that reason, I think it's unfair for another reason. I actually think Thomas was the opposite of doubting. I think he was honest Thomas. I think he was honest. He wasn't there with the other disciples. I suspect I would have said the same thing. You guys have all seen an illusion. You are having such grief, you believe you have seen a dead man. I won't believe it unless I put my fingers in the wounds in his hands and in his side. I won't. And so I've always thought he got a bad deal. So let's, for the purpose of this lesson, call him Honest Thomas. The disciples in our text were behind locked doors. They were full of sorrow. They were full of grief. Without knocking or opening the door, suddenly Jesus was just standing there with them. He had disappeared, then he appeared, and then he disappeared again. And when he appeared, he said, Shalom. Luke's gospel tells us that they were so frightened, they looked for a window to jump out of. They were so frightened, they thought they were seeing a ghost. Then Jesus invited them to examine him and touch him. And Jesus actually said in Luke chapter 24, does a ghost have bones? And they started rejoicing. And they realized it was the risen Lord. They realized the same thing we can realize that makes a life difference. Jesus is alive. So, where had he been? He missed the meeting. The Bible doesn't say. He could have been with Mrs. Thomas. I mean, it's possible he had a wife. We know one of the other disciples, Peter, had a wife. So it could be he was with Mrs. Thomas. Or he could have been grieving on his own. You know, people grieve differently. I've been doing this for a long, long time, and I can tell you there's some people that they have to have people around them when they're grieving. I know people can't stay in their home by themselves when they're grieving and after a spouse or a loved one has died. And I know other people who they're exact opposite. They need to be alone. They need to process their grief alone. Thomas may have been one of those kinds of guys. But for whatever reason, Thomas spent an entire week missing out on what the other disciples had. I find that kind of sad, don't you? He missed the peace Jesus had given them. He missed the presence of Jesus. He missed the prayer for them to receive the Holy Spirit. He missed Jesus' command to go out into all the world and preach the gospel. Jesus, for that extra week, was still dead in his mind. So there are some important truths I want us to learn from this morning. And the first is, when you isolate yourself from other Christians, you're going to miss some of God's greatest blessings. You are. Have you ever wondered why we worship on Sunday morning? It's the first day of the week. It's the day Jesus appeared to his disciples. In the New Testament, it's called the Lord's Day. Think about the measuring of time. Days and months and years are determined by the orbit and the rotation of the earth in relation to the sun. But it was God who gave us the week. In the book of Genesis, it tells us God created everything in 6 days, and then he rested on the seventh day. And that influenced the Jewish people who gave us the Bible. Now, the Jews didn't have names for the days except the Sabbath day. Other than the Sabbath day, they called the other days the first day, the second day, the third day, the fourth day. Names didn't come until many years later, and not from the Jews. In fact, the Romans had an 8-day week. During the first century, and Jews were under Roman rule, so they could celebrate their religious calendar according to the 7-day week, but as far as living in the Roman world, they had to observe the 8-day week. And the 8-day week the Romans had until the 3rd century, when Constantine adopted a 7-day week and declared that Sunday was to be a day of rest and people could worship. Our English words for the days of the week are actually a mismatch of ancient Greek and Roman gods, along with some Germanic influence on language. For instance, Sunday is named for the sun god. Monday is named for Moon Day. Tuesday is named after the German name for the Roman god of war, Mars, and so on. But there's a powerful meaning to the first day of the week that changed when Jesus was resurrected. The tomb was discovered to be empty on the first day of the week, on Sunday. Jesus first appeared to his disciples on the first day of the week, which we know as Sunday. Sunday never became the Christian Sabbath. Instead, it is the primary day of worship for believers in Jesus on Sunday. Our secular society considers Sunday just be part of the weekend. You grow up in the world, this cosmos, just a part of the weekend. But according to the Bible, it's the first day of the week, and it's a day of worship and rest. Paul Powell, in one of his devotionals, told us what's true, and that is, without God, our week would be sin day, mourn day, tears day, waste day, thirst day, fight day, shatter day. Because 7 days without God makes 1 week. The first day matters. It was the day the resurrected Jesus met with the disciples, as we just read. It was the day the early church began, on the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. It was the day New Testament Christians worshiped to serve their new Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And the Bible speaks about the blessing of us gathering together, and it says, let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. That's been a challenge the last year and a half. That has been a big challenge. I don't think I will ever forget the disappointment we experienced last spring when on one Sunday in early March, we had 670 people here. And by the middle of that week, we were in a meeting saying, I don't think we can meet at all. And it may be months before we can meet at all. And I remember thinking, I don't think a church can survive not being together. I don't think a church can survive not being in fellowship. Because you have to be able to meet and see each other. Look what Thomas missed. And I think Thomas has been replicated many millions of times over. And so it was a very, very difficult time. We went 10 weeks without meeting at all on Sunday or on Wednesday, and I still have in the back of my mind Tim and Sean and Doug setting up and we would try to angle it just right behind this screen and then that screen, and try to figure out exactly how we were going to make an online service and an online streaming work, and how we were going to make Wednesday night work. And I remember standing in an auditorium by myself, preaching over and over again. And I remember the discouragement of that and the fear about where that's going. And I remember wondering, will we ever be back? And if we are, will we ever be back to what we were? We were out 10 weeks. The last week of May, we were able to come back together and worship. Since then, God has graciously allowed us to gather even while we maintain precautions to prevent the spread of COVID. But I came to the ultimate conclusion that while we had our building closed, the church was still alive and well. Because the people of God, the church, knows Jesus is alive. But even though we know that, and even though we made it through somewhat, it's very important for us to remember, glorify the Lord with me, let us exalt His name together. Together. We miss out when we are not doing that together. And so I remember those first weeks we came back. And you know what I'd missed the most? Outside of your beautiful, wonderful faces, I missed the singing. I was still preaching. My son asked me not long ago, he said, what's the largest crowd you've ever preached in front of? And I said, somewhere 3,000 or 4,000, somewhere between 3,000 or 4,000. He said, do you get any more nervous preaching before 3,000 or 4,000 than you do like a regular Sunday? And I said, no, I preach the same way. If you come on Wednesday night, the crowd's much smaller. I preach the exact same way if there's 3,000 or if there's 3. It doesn't make that much difference to me. I'm going to try to represent God in the best way I possibly can. So it didn't make that big of a difference to me while I was preaching, but the singing, boy, that made a difference. Because while you were listening at home on Sunday, we were in here on Friday just playing the song and sitting around and listening to it as we were recording it. And I remember those first few weeks we came back to worship. And when we sang, I could not keep the tears from filling my eyes. There's just something special about gathering with the Lord's people on the Lord's day, gathering together. We draw strength from God, and we draw strength from each other together. And I know there's still some people who are COVID shy, and I know there's still some people that are at risk because of their health or their age and are still watching online. We still have hundreds of people watch online every week. I'm glad for that. I'm glad we're able to now provide that service for them. But I hope that never becomes the norm. Amen. And the one thing I don't want to happen to any of us is to lose the desire to gather together. To lose the desire to exalt His name together. Like Thomas, if you isolate yourself, you'll miss out on some of God's greatest blessings. We don't know how long it was after Jesus left that Thomas showed up. It could have been later that evening. It could have been later that week. All we know is that when the disciples finally told him, he said, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Later, when Jesus appeared to him, Jesus then said to Thomas, put your finger right here and look at my hands. Put your hand in the wound in my side. You said don't believe it. I'm saying believe. And Jesus approached Thomas and held out his hand and said, go ahead and take your finger and stick it through my hand. He pulled up his robe and he said, go ahead, put your hand in this gash. Lose your unfaithfulness and believe. Because see, when you look at the wounds of Jesus, you are better able to understand his great love. I remember back in 2004, the impact that the new movie, The Passion of the Christ, had on people. Particularly on Christians, but not just Christians, even non-Christians. I remember the impact the movie had on people. I remember the impact it had on me. I didn't go for a month. I thought, I can't handle it. I don't want to see it. Can't handle it. So finally I went by myself to a movie theater down at Gulf Coast Town Center and sat by myself and watched it. And it was all I could do to keep my eyes open and look at the screen. Because when you look at the wounds of Jesus, you better understand his great love for us. Here's a bit of trivia for you if you want to start a conversation about Jesus. The question is, what is the only man-made thing in heaven? What is the only man-made thing in heaven? If you think about it, the wounds of Jesus. Jesus visited earth. When he returned to heaven, he took some souvenirs of his visit with him. And those souvenirs are the scars in his hand and in his side. After he came back to earth, he still had them. He has kept those scars as a lasting memorial of his humanity through all eternity. His wounds are precious to us because he himself bore our sins in his body on the cross so that we might die to sins and live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. I love the old hymn, Crown Him with Many Crowns. One of the verses says, crown him the Lord of love, behold his hands and side, those wounds yet visible above, in beauty glorified. Those wounds are still visible. Still visible. I heard about a woman one time who was in the hospital and she had what looked like it was going to be a terminal disease. She was in critical condition and she was laying in the bed, and the hospital chaplain came by and talked with her a moment, and he said, ma'am, would you like for me to pray for you and administer last rites and forgive your sins? And she paused for a second. She looked up at him and she said, well, I don't know. Let me see your hands. He put his hands up and she said, no thanks. Your hands don't have any wounds in them. The one whose hands have wounds in them have already forgiven me, and I've already asked him for forgiveness. My friend, every scar has a story. I have a few scars from surgeries and wounds, and you do too. And every scar has a story. The story of the scars of Jesus is a love story. Jesus himself said, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. And then he went right out and did that very thing. You know what I find interesting? We have no idea whether Thomas followed through on his demand for proof. We don't know. Did he put his hands in the side of Jesus? We don't know. Maybe he did. Or maybe he simply fell to his knees in worship and said, as we read, "My Lord and my God." Whatever happened, faith came flooding into Thomas's life where unbelief had previously been. Whatever happened, the skeptic became a believer. I remember leading singing back in the 1970s in a revival meeting for the great G.P. Holt. G.P. Holt, one of the best preachers I ever heard, and was a big influence on my preaching and my style of preaching. And G.P. Holt was preaching on this story. And he said, "I only have 3 points today. Thomas doubting, Thomas pouting, and Thomas shouting." And he spent most of the time on Thomas shouting, "My Lord and my God. My Lord and my God." Which leads me to our last takeaway teaching from this text this morning. And that is, when you see who Jesus really is, you will worship him as my Lord and my God. See, Thomas didn't just claim to believe in the risen Jesus. He recognized the deity of Jesus. He didn't just say, "My Lord." He also said, "And my God." He got it. He got it. That Jesus was God incarnate. He got it. And Jesus accepted that title. Jesus didn't say, "Now hold on there, Tommy. I'm your Lord, but I'm not God." No, he didn't say that. You see, Jesus was not what so many people today say that he was, just a good Jewish teacher. He wasn't. Over and over and over again, he said of himself, "I am the great I am." That's the title God gave himself in the Old Testament. That's the title God gave Moses at the burning bush to recognize him. Jesus claimed to be alive before Abraham was. He said, "Before Abraham was, I am." Only God can make a statement like that. So while speaking to honest Thomas, Jesus then responded to him. And when he responded to him, he talked about you. Oh, yes, he did. He talked about you. He said, "Thomas, you believe because you have seen me. Blessed are those who believe without seeing me." You know what he's talking about there? Put your hand up and point your finger right back at yourself. Or at least I think so. Let me take a brief survey by a show of hands. Show of hands, okay? How many of you have literally seen the risen Christ with the eyes in your own head? Raise your hand. Whew. I didn't have a plan for if somebody raised their hand what I was going to do. And I usually have a plan. How many of you, by a show of hands, believe that Jesus is alive because you see him with the eyes of your heart? Raise your hand. All right then, Jesus pronounced a blessing on you. Blessed are those who believe without seeing me. History is full of seekers like Thomas who investigated and became believers. Look, I think we've done him a disfavor by calling him Doubting Thomas. I think had it been any of the other 10 disciples that were left at that point, any of them might have done the exact same thing, and we might have had Doubting Peter or Doubting John or Doubting Andrew. They just happened to be present when Jesus' resurrected body showed up. But this I know, Thomas investigated Jesus and became a believer. The last time Thomas's name appears in the Bible is in Acts chapter 1, where he is listed with the other disciples in the upper room on the day of Pentecost. Church history reports that Thomas went to current-day India and spread the gospel there. He preached for 20 years until he was martyred. Today, the patron saint of India is St. Thomas. And when the Dutch trading company landed on an island in the Caribbean, they named it St. Thomas. And they established there the St. Thomas Church. And whenever you get on one of those cruise boats or an airplane and fly to the island of St. Thomas, you are subconsciously remembering not Doubting Thomas, but Honest Thomas. So, have you come to the place where you can say, like Thomas, my Lord and my God? Now, give me 45 seconds. Don't tune me out yet. He didn't say, you're the Lord and you're God. He said, my Lord and my God. Yeah, people often talk about the Lord, about the man upstairs or with some other title. But true faith is not saying, well, yes, I believe he is the Lord. Or yes, you're Lord and you're God. True faith is saying, my Lord and my God. That's your personal faith. Is that what you have? I hope so. Because that is what allows you to believe those three amazing words that change any life situation. Jesus is alive.